Was a major clue just revealed in connection with the mysterious death and disposal of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, the teenager whose body was allegedly found in singer David's car? Turns out the private investigator who's been looking into this case just made a bombshell revelation on social media we got to talk about. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, real quick before we jump into this, got to tell you it's open enrollment season again. Yeah, this is where you compare the exploitative premiums, the fine print of health insurance. It is chaos. It is awful. The good news is we got a great sponsor to help us out, Crowd Health. It's different. You know why? Its members fund each other's bills directly. Now, if something big happens, you pay the first $500 and the crowd funds the rest. They have a track record of handling major events, including bills over $1 million, obviously giving you confidence. Plus, you get access to low-cost prescriptions, testing, high-quality doctors, and with the ACA subsidies expiring, premiums are going to skyrocket. So far, members have saved over $40 million. So this open enrollment, take your power back. Join Crowd Health to get started today for $99 for your first 3 months. Use code SIDEBAR at joincrowdhealth.com. Crowd Health is not insurance. You can opt out, but this is how we win. Join crowdhealth.com. All right, we got this David update that we got to talk about, and it may give us some sort of insight into what happened to 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, who, as you know, her body was found in a Tesla that was allegedly registered to singer David back in September out in LA. There have been no arrests. There have been no charges filed. There has been reporting, particularly from TMZ, that possibly an investigative grand jury out in LA may be hearing evidence. We did previous sidebars on that. You can check it all out. But one underlying question that we don't have the answer to, and from a forensic point of view, perhaps is a complicating factor, is what happened to Celeste? How did she die? What was the true state of her body? How was she moved? Which is why the update that I'm about to get into is so interesting. You want to talk about complicating. You know what else is complicating? The fact that the cause and manner of death hasn't been released, and that the details from the medical examiner's office have been sealed by court order. You know, according to a release from the medical examiner's office, it said at 10:54 a.m. on Friday, November 21st, the County of Los Angeles Department of Medical Examiner received a court order initiated by the Los Angeles Police Department to place a security hold on medical examiner case number 2025-14252 Celeste Rivas Hernandez. No records or details associated with the case, including the cause and manner of death and medical examiner report, can be released or posted on the website until further notice. And then you had the Robbery Homicide Division that released a statement not only addressing this, but also addressing the media reporting that Celeste was decapitated and that her body was either entirely or partially frozen. Now, this is based primarily on reporting from TMZ. They had a statement that said, Robbery Homicide Division statement on Celeste Rivas investigation, Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Police Department is aware of the recent stories posted by various media outlets about the David Celeste Rivas investigation and would like to dispel some misinformation contained in their reporting. The body of Celeste Rivas was not frozen when it was discovered on September 8th, 2025. She had not been decapitated. As far as the court order, the LAPD sought to seal the records of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's investigation into Celeste Rivas' death. That order was sought only to ensure detectives from Robbery Homicide Division learned of important information surrounding her death before the media and the public. The order was not sought to undermine transparency. Okay, now we got to talk about this update. And this update concerns Steve Fisher. We've had him on the program before. Steve is the private investigator who was hired by the owner of the property where David had reportedly been staying in the Hollywood Hills. That property was apparently near the Tesla. That property, by the way, was searched by authorities. Now, Steve has come out and made some comments about his investigation, including things like this.
But I will say this, there are some things that, and I'm talking physical evidence that was at that house that is, there could have been greater plans as far as getting rid of her. And it's scary, sadistic stuff. And that's why we're trying to learn more about that. I wish I could say more, but for obvious reasons I can't. But it doesn't have to do with how she died, but maybe how they were planning on ultimately getting rid of her, and how maybe that Tesla was just a holding spot at the time, and things just, their timing was just off as far as getting this done. But there's a few things that were just like, will blow your mind.
And he was recently discussed on another episode of Sidebar, where he made a post on X seemingly fighting back about potentially being held in contempt of court for allegedly talking about or discussing a case that he had seemingly testified about. He really fought back against that allegation as well. And we assume this was about the Celeste Rivas Hernandez case. Not definitively confirmed, but when you read between the lines of his message, it seemed to be that. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But now, given what he has said about his findings, this is what we need to talk about. He just posted this on X. Quote, "Although my words have been misquoted by some, what I actually said about certain items found at the Doheny address was that they were, quote, items you would expect to find on a farm rather than in a home in the Hollywood Hills. One of those items was a burn cage incinerator, advertised to burn at 1,600 degrees. Human cremations are typically performed at approximately 1,400 degrees. An incinerator is not legal to use within city limits and serves no legitimate purpose at a residential property in the Hollywood Hills. Some will argue that this item was intended as a prop for a video. If that were the case, it raises several obvious questions. Why would a 55-pound bird cage be delivered to a private residence instead of directly to a prop designer or production house? Why would it be ordered before departing on an extended world tour? And why was it never used in any video production? It is also important to note that there were additional items present that could be used in conjunction with the burn cage. To be very clear, this burn cage was not used. It was still new and in the box. However, given that Celeste Rivas Hernandez's remains were ultimately found in the Tesla trunk, the presence of an incinerator at the same residence associated with that vehicle necessarily raises questions about intent. The burn cage was not taken during the search warrant, and because it was not used, it appears it's not of importance to any possible criminal investigation. But we think it's important context, even if not criminal. The burn cage and other related items were delivered to the residence under a false name, although the deliveries were accepted at the property. Attached is a photograph of the actual burn cage incinerator as found at the residence, along with an image from Dr. Byrne's advertising materials for the product. Hashtag Celeste Rivas Hernandez, hashtag David. And he does include those photos, by the way. What do we make of this? Let me bring on Matt Irvine to talk about this, retired detective, law enforcement instructor. Matt, so good to have you here. Quite the statement from Steve Fisher, making it public. Your thoughts if this is true?
Well, I think Steve Fisher's remarks are very well considered. I cannot think of a legitimate, innocent reason why a burn cage would be received at a private residence, why it would be ordered under a false name. I also, frankly,
let's
can't
actually
understand.
Just start there. Keep your thought.
Okay.
The only thing I would say is about a false name, if he's a celebrity, he doesn't want people knowing that he's staying there. Thoughts?
Fair enough, but if he's got a bunch of people that he's working with because he intends to use this as part of a concert tour, as part of a video, he's got a whole staff of people that can order something for him. I don't understand why he would need to do it under an assumed name. But your point is well taken. That could be an innocent explanation. But again, to Steve's points, if that is indeed the intent for this item, why is it delivered to a private residence? Why is it not with him on tour? Why is it not taken to some location to be used for some kind of a video? That said, I also can't think of a good reason why LAPD didn't seize this item. I mean, if you're conducting an investigation into a body found in the trunk of a car, one of your working theories has got to be that this body was placed there in order to move it from the scene where the death occurred and then transport it to some third location to conceal it or dispose of it. And if you're looking at the possibility that somebody is trying to dispose of a body and you search the residence of a person of interest in that case and you find what is essentially a home crematorium, why don't you take that? I know that when you're serving a search warrant, you can only seize the things that the court authorized you to seize and that you told the court you expected to find there. I'm sure nobody expected to find this item there. But what you do in a search warrant when you find something evidentiary that was unexpected is you write what's called a piggyback warrant. It's a simple addendum where you say, hey, judge, while serving that search warrant that you issued, we found this other thing. We think it's evidence. We'd like to seize that too. It's a typical one-page addendum that's tacked onto your warrant. I've never seen a judge not sign one of those, and I don't know why that wasn't done in this case.
So let me ask you this, Matt. You could be 100% right? First of all, assuming this is true, that a bird cage was delivered there, and assuming for a moment that law enforcement didn't seize it, okay, let's say that's accurate. I guess the question would be either, like you said, it was beyond the realm, it was beyond the scope of a search warrant. Maybe they didn't amend it for whatever reason. Or is it possible, when we're trying to think about what happened to Celeste, her body showed absolutely no sign of burning whatsoever, and they couldn't definitively establish that the purchase, the delivery of this incinerator was related to her in any way?
Well, that's a fair statement. I mean, and as Steve Fisher mentioned, it was unused, but it seems like because of the circumstances that this body was found in the trunk of the car, that the crime of disposal of the body was incomplete, that there was a plan, or at least the beginnings of a plan, to conceal or dispose of the body, and for one reason or another, that plan was not fully executed. And that doesn't make the burn cage any less evidentiary. Again, a search warrant doesn't have to reach the level of probable cause to arrest. You just have to argue that you're investigating a crime and that this item is potentially evidence of that crime. So it's a much lower standard than what you would need to arrest somebody. And I think that standard is well met just by the circumstances of the discovery of Celeste's body. If
somebody had used that, could it thoroughly incinerate a body and there'd be no human composition left? There'd be no human remains left?
You know, I'm not familiar with that product. I trust Steve Fisher when he says that an incineration of a human body, a cremation, takes place at 1400 degrees. If this thing could go to 1600, I don't know what its capacity is at 55 pounds. I can't imagine it's that large. But, you know, that again brings us back to this allegation of dismemberment or potential dismemberment if you're going to dispose of a body in that way. It's a pretty awful thing to consider, but it looks like somebody may have been considering this.
Well, that's an interesting part, because when we first started on this case, there was a question: why was the body left in a Tesla? Either it was, somebody was in the middle of trying to figure out what to do next with the body, they panicked, or it was deliberately left there to cast suspicion on David, right? We thought that could have been a possibility. But if the body's left in the car and now you're thinking about the purchase of this incinerator, that is like really, really, really sloppy work. I mean, you're purchasing an item to be delivered for potentially the disposal of a body. I mean, that's the allegation, or one of the allegations. We don't know for sure. But if we're taking that as true, that is like really bad planning on a number of different levels.
Well, I would expect that however Celeste died was not something that was very well planned or thought through. And I would expect that if you've got a bunch of people who don't have significant sophisticated criminal histories and they're confronted with a dead body under whatever circumstance, panic would be a pretty likely reaction. And, despite all the stuff we see in TV and movies, most people that commit crimes aren't terribly sophisticated. These are not, Ocean's 11 type, master criminal kinds of enterprises. These are people that get in situations where they are way over their head. Things happen that they did not intend. And they get out of control and they panic. And a lot of the kind of circumstances of this case seem to suggest that.
And if it is true that that burn cage was not used, that it was left in the packaging, If someone had purchased that for the purpose, let's say, of disposing of Celeste's body, it gives you kind of an insight to someone's mentality and what they're capable of doing, which also makes me wonder, was this the first attempt to dispose of her body? If someone would be willing to incinerate her body, and we don't have definitive evidence of that, I mean, we're just taking this report from Steve Fisher for a minute, we're assuming it. Does it not give you indication about what the state of Celeste's body may have been like? And again, what's complicated is we don't know the cause and manner of death. We don't know more details, particularly about her body. But am I off to say if someone has the will to do that, would this have been their first attempt to dispose of a body? Does it give you an indication of what else may have happened to Celeste's body?
Well, you raise a couple of questions. I mean, everything about the circumstances of the discovery of poor Celeste's body suggests something that was not terribly well planned and an act that was not complete. In terms of the burn cage, it's hard to know when in the course of all of this item was purchased. Was this the first plan to dispose of her body, and for some reason, a plan B was hatched that involved putting it in the trunk of the car? Was there somebody that was supposed to remove the body from the trunk and place it in the burn cage, and for one reason or another, either failed to do that or decided not to do that? I mean, there's a lot we can speculate about here. I think the big takeaway is that one or more people, probably inexperienced in criminal activity, panicked and hatched one or more schemes, none of which ultimately were taken to their completion.
Mm-hmm. But what is complicating, I mentioned before, is you have this seal on the medical examiner records. In your experience, I don't know if you and I had an opportunity to talk about this whatever's going on between the ME's office and the LAPD is interesting, to say the least.
It is interesting and it is unusual. The LA coroner's office works with 40 plus agencies in the greater LA County area, but it works very, very closely with LAPD and particularly with robbery homicide. And, defense attorneys often complain that homicide detectives and the coroner work too closely together. I've attended autopsies where I'm standing with the medical examiner and we're looking at the evidence and we're talking about what we think may have happened. And when people are acting in good faith, that leads to good information and good investigations, but it's very hand in glove. And that's not true in every jurisdiction, but it's very true in LA. And it's particularly true for the truly expert and experienced people in LAPD robbery homicide. So for them to be issuing contradictory statements or for the LA coroner's office to say, we wish we could tell you, but we can't, and then LAPD coming out and saying what's being leaked possibly from the coroner's office is not true. I have never seen that before. These are people that work very, very closely together on very sensitive cases, and there's usually a lot of trust and a lot of cooperation.
Yeah, and the chief medical examiner released a statement at the time saying the department's mission is to have full transparency with the community by providing information about our cases to empower people to make changes that save lives. Since becoming the department head, I've worked on eradicating the practice of placing security holds on medical examiner cases simply by law enforcement request. The practice of security holds is virtually unheard of in other counties and has not been proven to improve outcomes in the legal system. We are dedicated to serving our community with full transparency. However, the law precludes us from doing so while the court order remains in this case. Look, I get the position of LAPD. They don't want to compromise an ongoing investigation. They want to be careful about what information's out there. Two questions I have for you is, one, do you think the medical examiner's office definitively knows the cause and manner of death for Celeste? And B, what is LAPD's greatest concern about information coming out?
So there's a lot about this that is very confusing and unusual to me. First of all, I would say it is very likely the LA Medical Examiner's Office knows as much as they're going to know. It's been more than 3 months since Celeste remains were discovered. I can't imagine a test or a procedure that would not have been performed by now and for which the results would not have returned. So I don't know what they know, but I'm afraid or I expect that they know all that they're going to. LAPD's greatest concern, obviously, is about information getting out that could damage the investigation, particularly at this point where nobody's been arrested or charged. That said, it's also strange to me that if their concern is protection of information, and the integrity of their investigation, that there would be, as has been reported, an investigative grand jury being held right now. Because when you bring people into an investigative grand jury and ask them questions, they then exit that questioning and consult with their attorney. And now you've got two people that at least have some insight into what the investigation is about. And if you've got multiple people being brought before a grand jury, there's often going to be a common defense agreement among them where all of the persons who are questioned and all of their attorneys are all talking to each other. So at least among the people who could potentially be charged or called as witnesses in this case, there's a lot of information potentially leaking out just by virtue of the grand jury process.
I've been told that one of the advantages of an investigative grand jury here, other than, presenting evidence and issuing subpoenas and gathering more evidence, and by the way, my understanding is this is a grand jury that wouldn't even be able to issue a formal indictment. You would need to bring it to another grand jury. But one of the advantages is you can lock in witnesses' testimony. And for a future case, hit them with it. Say, this is what you testified to in the grand jury. This is what you said. We're locking in your testimony as a future witness in a case, particularly when it's complicated, particularly when it's high profile. And there was reporting from TMZ about who may or may, who may be appearing at that courthouse, which can complicate it as well. But you tell me what you think the advantage would be.
So the advantage to an investigative grand jury is that they can compel the production of evidence, be it physical evidence, documents, records, or testimony. And that, as you said, can lock people into statements. It may be accompanied by immunity agreements and proffers where people are being cooperated. We've talked before about there possibly being a kind of a sliding scale of culpability here where they want to roll less culpable people on the more culpable people. Grand jury is certainly a way to do that. Often, though, in a typical criminal investigation, these locking people into statements and gathering evidence is done by the police. They're interviewing people, they're serving search warrants, and they're getting this information that way. So obviously they can't compel people under oath, but they're usually pretty good at getting people to talk. And so the fact that there is, at least as reported, an investigative grand jury suggests that there is evidence, be it documentary or testimonial, that the DA needs that the police have been unable to obtain.
And by the way, just so we're clear, if there is an issue, if the indictment is ultimately handed down and there's an arrest, are we, the public, or Celeste family, going to know every detail immediately? Are we all going to understand what happened to Celeste if and when that day comes?
It really depends on how the DA's office decides to issue the indictment. An indictment can be a very, very brief document that simply outlines the charges and the persons being charged, or it can be what they sometimes call a speaking indictment, which is more common on the federal side, where they really lay out a lot of the evidence in the indictment document. However, once somebody is indicted, it starts a discovery process where pretty much everything that's known to the prosecution is disclosed to the defense. More often than not, the defense may put stuff out there, at least stuff that they feel is helpful to their client. The DA really isn't going to present evidence that is publicly available until the case actually hits the courtroom, beyond what's listed in the indictment. Excuse me.
Yeah, no. Okay. This is an interesting development. We'll see what comes of it. So far, Steve Fisher's the only one I see that is talking about this incinerator and its possible connection to this case. All right, we'll keep a careful eye on it. Matt Irvine, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.